Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Cloudy with a Chance of Insights, the bi-weekly podcast all around the Microsoft Cloud, from D365 to Azure to M365. This week, as usual, and we have got a range of topics to cover. David is going to be talking about his favorite topic, or at least his favorite source of news, which is Microsoft Research, and they have launched their own podcast. Windows Server 2016 is end of support, apparently. And there are new cloud PC devices from Asus Nux and Dell Pro desktops joining the Windows 365 link, both GA in Q3 2026, apparently. There's a new book, Open to Work, by LinkedIn CEO Ryan Rosalansky and Anish Raman, and he will wrap up with Ansible playbooks, which are deployable via Azure policies. Cyrus is obviously going to go down in the security section, and this week he's talking about some updates to Zero Trust workshops, device management, and some change in configs, etc., with Apple, and Defender XDR updates as well. And then I will either wrap up or interject in between those two sections. I'm not entirely sure which way round it will go yet, to talk about the thing that I didn't feel I could talk about beforehand, but I probably could, to be fair, which is the private preview work that we were doing at IBM on Sentinel Lake and custom graphs. And I'll also do a little bit, which has become my sort of favorite topic over the last 2 weeks or so, around governance for AI. So there was an announcement or a blog post yesterday from the Power Platform team, or Power Apps team, I should say, where they actually basically admitted that the governance can't keep pace. So they need to think about what they're doing within that remit. Without further ado, I will pass it across to David to kick us off with is it a competitor podcast? I don't know, with the Microsoft Research podcast updates.
I'm going to do it in a slightly different order. I think I'm going to have to give you a little less information to begin with, because you've said most of what I want to say. But no, seriously. Yeah, just a handful of things this week. No deep introspective pieces like we were talking about last time. And I wanted to just remind people of the Server 2016 end of support notice, which is Jan 2027. There will be extended security updates, and this piqued my interest a bit, but it explicitly says in the article via Azure Arc, and I think that's the first time that I've heard only Azure Arc being mentioned. Now, I don't know if that's intentional, whether it's just one of those things that somebody's written and then, I'm inferring too much from it, but I'd be surprised if you can only get those security updates from Azure Arc. So I thought that was worthy of poking into a bit. And we'll have to dig into it to I guess see. And I'm assuming you guys haven't heard anything.
Yeah, it's interesting. And we've talked around Azure Arc quite a few times. I said we'll do a little bit more of a sort of not a deep dive, but perhaps a little bit more of a focus section. And we never have we? We never got around to doing it. So perhaps we need to put that on the backlog and perhaps resurface that a little bit, because that is an interesting thing. I suspect it's just an oversight, perhaps from their perspective, but who knows? Perhaps they're trying to position Arc more prominently in that area.
Yeah. And some other useful dates, seeing as we're talking about these things. So July 2026, extended support for SQL 2016 ends. October 2026, we have extended security updates ending for Server 2012. January, as I said, for Windows, and then July 2027 for SQL Server 2014. There's quite a lot of things there. And I think, we all know often the challenge isn't always the technology in these instances. How these pressures land against, well, everyone's trying to do AI at the moment. Who's going to worry about a little, Server 2016 lurking in the corner? And I think that's, a lot of these workloads will have just been sat there working, doing their own thing, quite happily in a corner. And it feels like I've had this conversation so many times, and there's a degree of apathy that goes with it, right? Because it just works. It's not our priority. We'll just leave it and ignore it, and we'll replace it when it breaks or something, or we don't care because it's not important or whatever it is. It still surprises me that I hear that, if I'm honest, in this day and age where, things can move so fast in terms of threats and stuff. Yeah. Anyway, I guess I'm sure you've had similar conversations, right?
The end of support stuff is weird, isn't it? I think one of the last proper projects I worked on was for I think you probably know which one it was, but it was a UK company that was doing the Windows 2008, migrating it to Azure so they could have the extended support which Microsoft were offering at the time. And they really were not in a hurry to do it.
Mm.
They were sort of being forced to go down that route in a way because of the regulations, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they were really like, why are we having to do this? It's working fine. It's secure. We're not having to worry about it too much. It's stable. It's not falling over. Yeah. I
Gotcha.
mean, I understand that sentiment to a certain extent.
And about the Windows Server, something said when I was watching about this news about the certifications again, the one I wanted to pass for years as my old school brain is the AZ800 and 801 to be like a hybrid cloud expert and really well Active Directory on on-prem servers, all this stuff. And they deprecate that one and it's going to go away. So the focus is really now full cloud and AI. So yeah, it's a bit sad to hear about this with the servers. I didn't know. I saw the titles you sent Dave just before about the end of life and Azure Arc. But yeah, definitely we should do a dive deep subject on Arc on-prem.
Cool. And then moving on to something that is sort of related. So I spotted the Ansible via Azure policy in private preview. So obviously when we were talking about servers and management and stuff, it's quite interesting because, it's used to being, Azure policy was, I guess, about defining guardrails. Would you say that? I think that's probably fair to say. And then being able to identify drift. Now, if you're extending that using Ansible scripts and configuration, which is ostensibly, it's my understanding, right? Ansible is mostly about configuration, isn't it, in the most part? Then you sort of, you bring more, to your point, right, we were chatting earlier, governance into that arena. So interesting. It'd be interesting to see how that goes. That's what I'm going to talk about. Well, yeah, the new Windows 365 cloud PC devices. And I'm still struggling not to call these thin terminals because I think that's broadly what they are, isn't it? But there's a fancy new name and there's some more of them. So there's the thing I find interesting about this is there's obviously more demand for it because, with memory and, memory certainly at a premium, building essentially dumb terminals that sole purpose in life is to connect to M365, there must be demand there, right? I don't see it personally, and I'd be interested to know where that demand's coming from. But there's enough for two fairly large manufacturers to build them. So I thought that was quite interesting book. So I've not read this, by the way, and I'll probably grab a copy, and whether it's somebody just capitalizing on the sentiment of everyone, but it's especially given maybe we should mention the Oracle thing and wish all those people well. So 30,000 people let go from Oracle via a fairly cold email, I gather, early in the morning. So horrible position for people to be in. But this book, written by some Microsoft folk called Open to Work, How to Get Ahead in the Age of AI. And, I think is trying to help people understand, there's advice left, right, and center, right, in terms of what you should be doing in this AI age. And somebody's written books. I will give a proper review on that, but always useful to know that there are more assets out there for people that may need it when they're looking at career change. And then, just quickly, the Microsoft Research podcast. So a chap, Doug Berger, used to work with him when I was in Microsoft, Doug, and he's recently joined Microsoft's research as, gosh, I can't remember, but quite important. He's quite an important chap there now. And he's obviously decided that, they release so many interesting things, lots of research papers, obviously very science-driven, being research, and probably going to make it a bit more difficult for me because he's going to start doing all the stuff that I do in this. So we'll have to see. But there are some, they've done a few of these videos now, the podcasts. So go have a watch because it's super interesting stuff.
I will.
I'm going to stop there.
Excellent. A couple of things. Now, I was trying to interject, and it was probably a good job I was actually on mute. So I'm going to have to do a little bit of editing,
sorry,
I think, when we go through the editing. But I think we talked about this certainly in a previous episode. But the whole sort of dumb terminal, or very thin client, or whatever you want to call it, for these devices is interesting, because you're right, there is a market out there, but the only place I've ever seen this market has been in the legal sector. And I have no idea why, but for a little while, about 25 years ago, I was working for a smaller company based actually quite locally to here, that specialized in VMware. And that's basically what they primarily did, was just support VMware clients and Citrix. And they fell into two stools. It was either legal firms, and they had like about 5 or 6 legal firms on their books, all using various flavors of Citrix. And I'm trying to think of what the right term is, but basically medical sort of research companies. And I have no idea why. There was no like retail, even though there probably is that space in retail. No sort of transportation or any of the other sort of sectors. It was primarily those two. I don't know, might have been location, just might have been other reasons. But yeah, they loved their little WISE terminals, which was the sort of prominent make at the time. And Ansible, I should know, because obviously Ansible is an IBM company. So I should know what
exactly.
What does.
That's interesting.
There is so much technology to learn about.
Yeah. No, but right now I am having an internal debate whether to keep talking or pass it across to Cyrus. But I might well just keep talking, and we'll let Cyrus wrap up with some security updates.
Please.
But I wanted to talk about 2 things. And the first one, which I'll cover off, and again, I've mentioned this last week and the week before as well. And say week, obviously that's 2 weeks, in 2 weeks, that I was working on something that I didn't feel I could talk about. Now, I actually spoke to somebody at Microsoft, and they said, "Don't be stupid. You could have talked about this ages ago." But I was being obviously a little bit too careful. But we, as in IBM, were invited to work with Microsoft on the private preview for Sentinel Lake and Sentinel Graph back in, I don't know when it was, October last year sometime. Now, we did some work for Ignite, which we presented on the IBM booth at Ignite, which was just the sort of standard graph and standard lake. So that was just basically leveraging the existing connections that Microsoft had for the Microsoft products. So whether that was Entra or Defender, etc., which by default, in inverted commas, is available within the lake, and you can build the graphs off of that. Now, the next stage for that was to develop custom graphs. So this was where you would be able to take feeds from other systems that were not part of that initial sort of Microsoft product suite that was supported. So that could be other security tools. And so we did it with Tenable, with Qualys, and we've got some sort of dummy feeds coming in from things like ServiceNow, et cetera, to build up the underlying lake, primarily from an asset view, but it could be from any area. With the idea being basically is that you then ingest all of that data from disparate sources into Sentinel Lake, which in effect is basically just a log analytics extension or replica, or whatever you want to call it. And then you can build your graph over the top of it, which basically is a rather long-winded, Microsoft process where you have to build a Jupyter notebook, which does all the sort of queries. You can instantiate like an ephemeral graph locally, which you can then use to test your processes. And then you basically deploy it via YAML into a Spark cluster, and then which gets deployed into the sort of Microsoft part of the graph, which you can then access outside of that. Now, when we started work on this, there wasn't an interface actually within the Defender portal where you could actually look at these graphs. So the only place you could see them, if you wanted to query it, was actually within VS Code. But there is again, I'd have to check whether this is in private preview or in public preview. But anyway, there is now a Graph Explorer coming at some point in time into Defender, which will allow you to actually look at those and query those graphs in Defender. But what we did at the time was actually create our own user interface to look at these. So we developed I was going to say quite a lightweight sort of Node.js website that would actually enable us to query those. And it did give us some really interesting insights, particularly around connections that we probably would not have normally seen. So that was really good. It's well worth having a play around with if you've got the opportunity. A couple of things that came up that I think might be worth raising or might not be. This might just be me being overly negative. Who knows? Is that you have to do this via VS Code. There is no other real mechanism at the moment. So you basically build your Jupyter notebook, on which one of the queries one of the ones I've got is like got 10 different sections. But you build up basically the data by doing KQL queries against this table, joining it with this table, joining it with this table, and it basically becomes like a big, massive code. That is an interesting challenge for, say, a SOC analyst to do. So I think that is going to be an interesting step change for some people, that they might either have to bring developers in to work on this, but then the developers are not going to necessarily know the security landscape. So this is going to be quite potentially challenging to make sure you've got the right skills interlocked to build the graphs. And then you have to learn a new query language, and GQL, as opposed to KQL, to actually query them. And obviously, even to instantiate the graph, and they actually use a different term, but I'll use the word instantiate. You actually have to build the graph and the data as part of a job. So you basically schedule a job which builds the graph and the data. So if you change the data, you have to rerun the job. If you change the graph, you have to rerun the job. And that's a costable or chargeable exercise. So it's something you have to think about, is how fresh do you want that data to be? And how much, in inverted commas, cost can you swallow to get that data coming into the graph so that your queries are fresh, etc. So those were a couple of sort of, not so much gotchas, but things to be aware of if you were going to look down that route. The other thing to be aware of, and I don't think this really matters so much when you're using the sort of Defender portal, but if you're going to put a layer over this, you do need to think a little bit about performance, because querying the Sentinel graph itself and the underlying data lake, if you want to do some sort of enrichment process or something like that, is not the quickest. And which is fine, because it's not really designed for that. But if you wanted to do it, you have to just be aware that if you're running a query within a query window, getting a response back in, 5-10 seconds is probably perfectly acceptable and understandable. But if you're putting a UI layer over the top of that, that becomes a bit of a worse user experience. But anyway, that was the big secret that I wasn't talking about. At some point in time, I'm going to put a little blog post together and actually talk about that in a little bit more detail. But anybody that's interested in the graph technology, and it is different to the knowledge graph that they're doing within the sort of M365, work IQ space. It is a different implementation. So it's odd that they've decided to do it in completely different ways. But I suppose that is Microsoft. I mean, I don't know. Microsoft always used to be a little bit siloed, and they would do things in one team that was different to the way the other teams did things. It is what it is. But anybody in that space who wants to have a look at it, go and have a look, because it is an interesting way of looking at that sort of security piece. So now I think after a year and a bit, where I say we cover the whole breadth of the Microsoft Cloud on the intro, and I think I've done one Dynamics story in the space of that period. Now, this is not Dynamics. It is Power Platform. And this tangentially, I suppose, links in with the conversation we had on the last pod, where we were talking a little bit about not so much governance, but about sprawl, where especially with Power Platform, where you can just spin up stuff and do things. And with AI, you can just spin things up. So there was a blog post published on the 1st of April. So yesterday as we're recording this, but a few days ago when you'll be watching this, from a chap called Ryan Jones, where he basically admits that governance can't keep up with the pace of AI development. And when I say development, I don't mean, Microsoft have released a new version of X or anything else, although that will play into this story. It's more about the fact that I can build something and deploy it in a couple of days, and then the governance tail will take, assuming you have a governance tail, which is another question, could take weeks to approve the app that you built in, a couple of hours or a day or whatever it might well be. So there is a big gap between those two areas. And one of the things that was potentially interesting about that is that, one of the reports, I think it was the CyberPulse report in February this year, said almost 30% of employees are already using unsanctioned AI agents in the enterprise. So if you tie that with the governance story, you've got a bit of a gap there as well. So we'll see how that sort of rears up over the next probably 6 to 12 months, and especially with things like Agent 365 coming into GA I think it's in May. So in theory, that's going to give you some level of governance, but only because you're treating the agents as an identity, as opposed to perhaps having those guardrails or the visibility or observability in place right at the start. But we'll see. This is a constantly changing area, so we'll see how it goes.
Yeah. Talking about agents, did I read this? The OpenClaw chap has been hired by Microsoft, I think.
Yeah,
Did I read that?
Omar
Yes,
something. Yeah.
That came up in a call literally before we started to record the pod. And for anybody that's watching is thinking they look a bit different, that's because normally we record the pod on a Friday morning, but now we're doing this on a Thursday evening, and Cyrus and David are actually technically on annual leave. So if the vibe is different, that's probably why.
We're not
drunk.
Yeah, say how it's Richard. Go on.
So, and something else that came up, and I didn't realize this, but there was an article about the Wordle chap on the BBC the other day. Complete tangent. I didn't know he was Welsh, but there you go, Dave.
Oh, I'm not sure even I knew that, and I feel thoroughly ashamed. So I shall chastise myself and go and find which bit of Wales he came from.
Yeah. So there you go. So another famous Welshman for you to talk about. But apparently he claims he's not played Wordle since he sold it to the New York Times, which was the gist of the article. But anyway, after that complete randomness, and I suppose for once, I am going to do the whole, if you like this, click on the subscribe, follow with bloody blah buttons now, as opposed to at the end of the recording, which is the normal way that I do this. So just to repeat, if you're enjoying what you're seeing or listening to, please click on the like button, the subscribe button, the follow, whatever it is from the platform that you're doing. It does help us in terms of it helps people find us, etc., etc. So please do. And now, enough of my waffling. Chris, let's pass it across to you to wrap us up with some security updates.
Yeah, I'm going to go on a tangent too a bit, so I'm sorry for that in advance. The vibe is different, yes. Today, you were talking, Richard, about having the codes skills for this new kind of SOC because of this secret project you had. I was thinking of these agents. Soon you will recruit agent anyway, so this is better for them to have access to codes. Okay, I'm going to stop digressing here. Or maybe one more. Last episode, I was talking about this game, the data center, and both of you didn't really enjoy that news because, yes, it's reminding the job and stuff. And I read the comments on Steam, and a lot of people say, oh my God, it's reminding me of my job. Hell yes, I'm going to buy that game for that. Or absolutely not. And by playing a bit, it was released like 3 days ago. It's still in early access. And it reminded me something. You were talking about gamification, Richard. And it's something I remember one of my first interview for a security role. I remember the person unexpectedly asked me a question. He said, you didn't put your root.me, or because there was, it was like hack the box, root.me on your CV. I need to see your score. And I'm sure in the future, you're going to recruit people more on what they can do. So, they applied skill on Microsoft or a game. What's your score into this data center game or whatever infra game or security game we would have. So I know that because we talk a lot about education because of my kids. We look for schools or different things, and we question even the concept of schools now with AI, because people can learn like literally in any Gen AI, you have now a learning mode. What's learning mode? And sorry, I digress completely here, so I'm going to recenter. So my news quickly on 3 words. I put 3 words for me to remember. I put strategy, device management, and response. The first one, strategy, was more something quick. It's about Zero Trust workshop. Last week, again, I'm talking at Richard a lot. So last week, you talked about that Microsoft expanded the Zero Trust guidance and they added a new pillar, the AI pillar. And they also added more coverage on data networking. And so now we have the ability to do that security, that Zero Trust workshop fully on the web. And that's very cool because you don't need to download like report or Excel spreadsheet or PowerPoints. You can do everything quickly from a quick discussion with your clients, and you can navigate directly on the web or between the team. So are we secure or not? because we use the buzzwords, we use like zero trust to a team can mean something and the different team on a different building means something else. And at least here you have a coherent and tangible way to define the same security controls and, like, for example, what to do next, or actually how we can start. So have a look. I'll send the link, and this time I will not forget, Richard, I promise. After that recording, I'm going to send you the link. You probably have it already. Next one, quick. I didn't want to bother too much with Intune. Usually it's a bit, out of subject of security, but it's still linked. But this one is impactful. So if you manage Apple devices, which is a lot of company, that more than I thought before, this one is those updates that look small, but it become urgent. Apple has deprecated the older MDM-based software update approach, and Microsoft is steering customers to declarative device management, or DDM. And I didn't know that. I learned that like literally this week. I was surprised because MDM was the way to go, but now it's not Microsoft's fault. It's more an Apple thing. And so that's the big March 2026 improvement, is that assignment filters now works with DDM-based configuration, including software updates for iOS, iPadOS, and macOS. And yeah, so DDM is worth explaining in simple words. With the old model, the server tells the device what to do and waits for check-in. That's the old model. With DDM, the device handles more of the update logic itself. That gives more reliable flow, and it's a better user experience. So that's what I understood. And it's also better for reporting. So it gives you a better reporting. So there's fewer awkward moments where the policy exists, the admin is happy, but the device has quietly decided to do something else. Quickly shifting to Defender XDR, I've seen two updates. One, I've made an article because I was really excited. We discussed here about different incidents or security breach, etc. And David talked just earlier about, and I didn't know that one at all, the end of life of Windows Server 2016 and Azure Arc. It's a bit linked. I'll talk about that just after. It's the asset management. For, again, March 2026, you probably heard about this one. Proactive user containment became generally available. There's still some part that are private preview, but it's part of the predictive shielding. So that if you want to Google predictive shielding, it's a lot of concept. So this means Defender can identify exposed credentials that are likely to be abused and then contain the user on protected device. So the important detail is that this happens at the endpoint layer. It does not simply disable the account in Entra. Instead, it blocks the attacker's ability to use that identity across onboarded devices. Cuts off the things like remote access, lateral movement, and all the kind of activity that often turns one compromised account into a much bigger problem. Sorry, my window closed. So there's a link also with the article I've written about a Microsoft update recently on my blog. It's about how Microsoft Defender protects high-value assets in the real-world attack scenario. The main idea is simple. Not all systems carry the same risk. We know that a domain controller, an Exchange server, or identity infrastructure should not be treated like an ordinary endpoint. Why this is explained this way? Because I remember when I was doing projects with Defender clients, they come with, for example, an RFP. We're done with this kind of security tools. We want to go to Microsoft. Okay, cool. So by doing that exercise, we respond to the RFP usually, and we don't say IBM necessarily, but it's just like common. Okay, we want to give a cheaper price, so we want to put Defender on the devices of the user. That's cool, but also on servers, and then it's a checklist. But you can't just treat like all the servers this way. And often the case, and personally I've done that, I remember 2021, not myself, client was excited. We have cheaper cost with a Defender with the Microsoft licenses. So you just treat all the servers in a different way, in a similar way, sorry. So check the article. It looks at how Defender use asset context to apply stronger, more targeted protection where the blast radius is the highest, but also how to continue to be operational in case of attack, because you can't just you need to be careful of how this is deployed. It's different, yeah. So once that is done, you're starting to break the attack chain in place that matters the most. For my news, this is all. I can digress too much on the Defender one because I wanted to link the other article, but it will not be fair. I already talked too much. Yeah, I thought that was naturally flowing with your two news today, Richard and David.
No worries, Cyrus. And I think you're right, specifically around the asset context stuff, because from a cybersecurity perspective, I don't know whether that is really one of the key areas that people focus on. But I've come to know over the last X number of months that this is very, very key in some of the sort of investigatory, I don't know, one of those words, sort of elements of cyber threat and cyber management around that, because knowing that context, which you don't often know in an environment, because it's, what CMDBs are like. They're typically full of holes and you can't really grab the context that you need for a particular asset, whether in the estate, whether that's a server, whether it might be a laptop or a mobile device, whatever it might well be. So that's becoming very, very interesting. It was one of the reasons why we started to build the custom graphs within Sentinel that we ended up doing, was because of that missing context around the asset. So it's interesting that you brought that up. And yeah, I was going to go off on another slight tangent around that, but I'll stop and go off on a completely different tangent. Because we couldn't do an episode without me talking about some sort of vibe coding thing at the moment. And I don't know whether to share this or not, but I'll share it. But I've stumped up for Claude Code last week. So the £18 a month, I think they could call it the pro level, but I'm not entirely sure that I would classify this as pro, seeing as I burnt through my daily token allowance in about an hour and a half. So that is something for people to be aware of. And it's probably because I've been using IBM's version, which I don't have to worry about tokens so much. But that sort of completely burned down on that was really interesting, because I was new to Claude Code. I wasn't doing it in the way that I would be doing it within GitHub Copilot, because I've obviously got some mechanisms around that to, reduce the token size, work more efficiently, et cetera, et cetera. But that limit, I've hit that limit about 4 or 5 times in the week that I've been using it, even though I've started to implement the same sort of controls and same sort of guardrails that I have put in GitHub Copilot, even though I'm using Sonnet in both models, which is really interesting. So I don't know what Microsoft is doing as that layer over the top, but it's obviously doing something in there, especially if you're using it in VS Code, which I tend to do. Although Claude doesn't, I don't know whether, David, you've looked at this. Claude doesn't really integrate into VS Code the same way that GitHub Copilot integrates into VS Code. So you don't see the same view and you don't quite have the same visibility of the code base, etc. So
yeah, no, I use the model a lot.
Oh, go on, you go.
Yeah. I was going to say I use the models a lot in GitHub in Visual Studio Code. Yeah, GitHub Copilot. And you're right. I mean, I pay for GitHub Code. Is it Pro? I don't even know what the GitHub version is called, but you get quite a lot of tokens for that. And I've even with all my website development and stuff, I bit through about a third of it, I think.
Yeah.
And that was super intense. Lots and lots of iterations. So
yeah. So what I learned was that Claude on the pro level, at least, and I'm assuming because there's another level above that, which is I think it's called Max or something. But anyway, it's like £100 and you get like a £200, et cetera, et cetera. Is that they have different rates or different limits during the day as well. So they've got like a peak token limit as well as an off-peak token limit. So I was constantly hitting that as well. And it was like, okay, right, I need to remember to actually do this in the evening or during lunch or whatever it might well be. So there was lots of little weird things that sort of crept into that. So anybody that's looking at Claude Code that might have come from a VS Code GitHub Copilot world, just be aware that it seems to be a lot chattier, uses up a lot more tokens a lot quicker, not quite integrated into VS Code the same way perhaps you might well expect. But I did like there's an artifacts mode in Claude Code, which I actually quite liked. And that seemed to work really well. And I am messing about with projects at the moment. I've not quite got projects to work, I think, the way that they're supposed to be working. But that is another difference, I think, to the way that Copilot is working, I think. I haven't done any of the co-work stuff because that doesn't really fit into what I'm doing. Although I don't know whether anybody saw that Microsoft is releasing their own version of co-work in Copilot.
So,
and the final note on that, obviously, is the fact that they managed to release all their source code onto.
I saw that. Was it an April Fool?
Yeah.
So I don't know, because I read something, I think it was today, where they actually said we've done it on purpose. We don't want to essentially, if I was to vastly summarize, we don't want to get to the same position as OpenAI.
Wow.
So
Okay.
they've decided to open source it. Now, to your point, I don't how much truth there is in that, because the web is a wonderful place, and I may have stumbled on a news source that wasn't necessarily accurate, but it'd be worth looking at and having to dig around, because if they have done it on purpose, I mean, super interesting stuff, right?
Yeah. So on that news, unless there's something from you, Cyrus, or David, to wrap us up?
Quickly, because now I see like David is really well versed into Copilots, GitHub Copilots. You're now going to the Cloud family, and me and the IBM Bob. And probably for the next episode, or just a subjective feeling on which one you prefer. Because all three of us are vibe coding a lot. I know we are doing a lot. And that's a very interesting subject. Like I'm off, like David, and I'm the nights I still vibe code, and it's just an addictive. All this project I had on the side, and I know it's the same for you. So yes, we need to talk about that. Sorry, it's pre-digression, so I'm going to censor myself here. But keep that in mind.
That's good.
Excellent. So, which I think just about leaves us. So we're actually finishing. I'm not going to say finishing on time, but I think 41 minutes is not a bad length for a podcast. So thank you, as always, to David and Cyrus, especially this week, considering that you're both technically on annual leave and shouldn't really be doing, work adjacent stuff. So thank you very much for joining us and contributing with your technical knowledge. And thank you to the listeners and watchers or viewers or whatever the phrase is for joining us. And we will see you again in 2 weeks' time. And that's it from us. Thank you very much. Bye.